I've clicked onto the Global Tropical RE for August 19th, 2023. As is always the case in these videos, the thoughts expressed here are mine alone, and when making decisions ahead of any tropical cyclone, and particularly ahead of Hurricane Hilary, look towards your local weather office, local emergency management, and the National Hurricane Center for the latest advisories. They're going to be able to give you all the information on local impacts. I'm just here to give you a big picture of what's going on. So it's pretty clear what we're starting off with. This is Hurricane Hilary. The system is continuing to weaken now. It was to Category 4 yesterday and last night, but throughout the day today, it has been weakening as it has been dealing with increased shear, increased dry air, and decreasing sea surface temperatures. But this system remains powerful, still, I believe, maybe Category 2 or Category 3 on the Saffir-Simpson scale as it comes up the coastline of Baja, California. And all day today, we've had tropical storm force winds impacting areas such as Cabo San Lucas and points north, and those impacts will continue spreading over the Baja, California as we go through the rest of this weekend. We have hurricane warnings in place for the central and northwestern part of the Baja California Peninsula, as we do expect this inner eye wall, or well, you can't really call it an inner eye wall anymore, but this center of circulation that still has strong hurricane force winds with it, to come right near or right ashore in that region, and that's why we have hurricane warnings out. There's also going to be heavy rainfall, especially in the southwestern U.S., and storm surge as well. This system will be putting onshore flow to a large region of the Baja California Peninsula, not only on the side facing the overall Pacific, but also the side facing Mexico. You can actually see some streaming flow onshore there north of the storm, and you can get some storm surge there. But the most extreme storm surge from the storm will be near the center when it makes landfall. If it does make landfall, even if the center gets close and just brushes offshore, you could still get some significant storm surge there. Now, this is the GFS model. This is a 250 millibar chart, and you can see the reason I'm showing you this is if you look at the true color imagery, you can see why we have all the flash flood alerts in California. You could see all these clouds being streamed up northward. This is all that tropical moisture with Hilary being transported up north. And I can actually go to the western U.S. to get a better view of this, because what we've got in the upper levels is we've got this upper level trough here, and we have an upper ridge building over the central United States. This is going to attribute to high heat in the central U.S. this week. But between these two, we have a very strong jet streak here, and you can see some of the winds at max over California and Nevada. We have winds over 100 knots aloft, and this is allowing all that tropical moisture with Hilary to race up northwards, and this will allow very high precipitable water rates, very high relative humidity, and allow that water to come down pretty quickly. We are very concerned, and I'm sure you've heard about it all in the news, about the heavy rainfall that we're going to see here. And this is depicted pretty well by the Weather Prediction Center excessive rainfall outlook. This is the outlook for potential of flash flooding, and you can see there is a high risk across much of Southern California. And I have to say, out of my years of tracking tropical cyclones, you do typically get higher end excessive rainfall outlooks. This is one of the larger, higher risks and even moderate risks that I've seen in some time from the Weather Prediction Center. This gives sort of a sense of how significant of an event this is. We're talking about rainfall in some of these areas that would be multiple months to a year, maybe even multiple years worth of rainfall in a very short amount of time. We could be talking about several inches of rain in just an hour. This is a desert region for those who may be seeing the rainfall totals and thinking that's not much. So while in the eastern U.S., while getting 4 to 6 inches of rain is not too much, here in the desert, that's not normal. And they typically get, a couple inches, maybe 3 inches in a year. This is a very significant event. And because of the higher topography here, we can get a lot of higher totals. You can see some of that coming into play as well in the Baja California Peninsula, potential of 10 to 15 inches in the higher elevations. And even, it should be mentioned, these totals here, they may not be too high enough for some of the higher terrain. Of course, it is difficult to predict exactly how heavy rain will be, but with higher topography, you could certainly get totals exceeding 10 inches in some areas. This is a very significant event. Now, the good news is the system is not going to be sticking around for too long. It's going to be quickly moving up. You can see the center coming into California tomorrow evening over or just east of San Diego as a weakening tropical storm, and by Monday the system will begin to move out of the region, and more rainfall impacts will spread into the Pacific Northwest and the northern Rockies as the system dissipates there. But very significant situation unfolding here, and you can see as well all the watches and warnings in place, including a tropical storm warning in Southern California, which I believe that's the first time that has happened on record, as the National Weather Service prior to this season was not able to issue those warnings, but here we are now having those warnings issued. You can also see just how extensive the wind field is. You can see the tropical storm force wind field extends about, I think, 200 or 300 miles east of the center of circulation. And you can see even in Cabo San Lucas, even though the center is well far west of you, you're still getting significant impacts here of tropical storm force winds. And you can also see for portions of mainland Mexico, you also have some tropical storm watches and warnings, so significant impacts there are forecast, even though the system is only forecast across just about the coastline of Baja California, or even come offshore. There is still that possibility that it still just remains offshore. But even if it does so, in most of these western tracks that I can see here, you can see on the forecast cone, you still likely get hurricane force winds and strong storm surge here, especially in the central portion of Baja California. So again, I'll reiterate for those in the southwestern U.S. especially, look towards your local weather office, the National Weather Service. I'll have links in the description for the National Hurricane Center and the National Weather Service. They're going to have the best information on local impacts. But now that's all that I've got to talk about for Hilary, but we're going to move to the Atlantic. It is getting towards peak season. It is very active across the Atlantic. We have, I believe, 5 areas of interest that we are monitoring for development over the coming days. We have a tropical wave here near the Bahamas and the Florida Keys. This will continue tracking into the Gulf of Mexico and could become a tropical cyclone before it comes into South Texas later this week. We are also watching a tropical wave near the Windward Islands as it tracks into the Caribbean, could become a tropical cyclone as well, though despite that, impacts are still occurring in the Windward Islands as we speak. We have Invest 99L, which I believe is going to be designated Tropical Depression 6 at 5 o'clock. But this system is forecast to remain fairly weak. There's a lot of dry air, and there's also some shear that is impacting it right now that will likely keep it at bay and keep it from being a significant system overall, though the remnants of it are expected to move westwards and could bring some increased shower and thunderstorm activity to the Leeward Islands as it eventually interacts with Invest 90L here on the Windward Islands. We also have Invest 98L west of the Cabo Verde Islands. This is a broad system and could become a tropical cyclone at any time, though the system is forecast to remain weak and stay out to sea. Now, we're also watching a tropical wave here off the coastline of Africa. This system is forecast to track northwestwards over the coming days and could bring some adverse impacts to the Cabo Verde Islands as it develops slowly. That's a lot, but we're mainly going to be talking about the Gulf system and Invest 90L here by the Windward Islands. Let's start off with the Gulf of Mexico system. This isn't an Invest, so there isn't a floater that I can go to for this on Tropical Tidbits at least, but you can see a lot of general thunderstorm activity here firing around the Bahamas, and this will soon move into South Florida. And this system will continue moving westwards under the influence of the subtropical ridge alongside a ridge that is building over the central United States. Now, conditions right now are not overly unfavorable. There's a little bit of shear impact in the system. We do have a bit of an upper level low here near eastern Cuba, but as it moves into the Gulf of Mexico, it's forecast to interact with a decaying frontal boundary, and it's also forecast to have a generally low shear environment. Now, here's a GFS model. This is the initialization for the morning run. And you can see the tropical wave here in the model. It's not too strong of a signature, not nearly as strong as, say, 90L is on the model, but there is a little bit of a wind shift here that you can see, indicating that the trough axis is about like that. Now, the system will continue moving westwards, and you can see as it gets into the Gulf of Mexico, we do start to see some improvement of the wave. It starts to become more of a sharp axis here. And eventually, as the system gets towards the coastline, we start to see an area of low pressure develop as it gets right towards the coastline. Now, this may be a case where it's a very close call between a tropical cyclone and a tropical wave, or area of low pressure, rather, right before landfall. But this does depict the scenario that we could have a quick forming tropical cyclone here. Now, I'll show you, I'll go back here. This is Monday morning. The system is about centered here, and there is generally upper level ridging taking shape. This is a fairly low shear environment. There might be some shear from this ridge in this upper low here over Mexico, as there is some more southeasterly winds aloft, while the surface winds are more easterly. But overall, the environment still is fairly favorable, and you can see the GFS there does depict some potential for tropical cyclone development. The National Hurricane Center currently gives this about a 50% chance of doing so, and I'd say I agree with that estimate. And really, I'd say that this system is more good news for Texas, as we do have a significant drought taking place right now, as it's been very hot and very dry over really the entire state this entire summer. So this is more of a welcome sign here for Texas, and maybe we can get some of the moisture to come up a little bit north to areas that may need it a little bit more. But with this ridge building up north, I don't think that's really going to happen, just given the strength of that ridge that's forecast. Now, we're going to move to the second system. This is Invest 90L, and you can see it's centered here in the Windward Islands. Here's Barbados, and here's South America here. Now, if we look at the satellite imagery, we can see some southerly winds on the eastern side of this, curling around with the trade winds to northeasterly winds on the western side. Now, the main question that we look for, especially in these developing tropical waves, is have they developed one, organized convection, but also have they developed westerly winds on the southern side? And if you look at surface observations, there's not a lot of evidence to support westerly winds here. You can see a station here. I'm not sure exactly which island it's called, but you can see more southeasterly winds on the southern side of this tropical wave. So there's not a lot of evidence to say, westerly winds, but it's possible in this region just south of the area of low pressure that there could be some westerly winds. What we'll need to confirm that really is an ASCAT pass, or we could get the system to maybe track a little bit north here and maybe get this surface observation station south of the center, and maybe we could see if there are westerly winds just south of that center. But overall, despite this not being a tropical cyclone, there's still some strong winds here, potentially up to tropical storm force, and there's also a lot of disorganized thunderstorm activity here that can, of course, lead to some flash flooding issues in a short period of time. Now, as the system gets into the Caribbean, given the current trends that we've seen today, the system has been doing better than models had anticipated. And you can see actually the GFS does have this becoming a weak tropical cyclone, or that might just be an area of low pressure. It's hard to tell on vorticity maps at times, but either way, could be a weak tropical cyclone coming through the Windward Islands, by tomorrow morning. Now, the system does struggle a little bit after that on the model. And what I think might be happening here is while the trade winds aren't too strong here, you can see we don't have streaming easterlies here like you'd typically expect in an El Nino year here in the Eastern Caribbean. We actually have more southeasterly winds here into the Eastern Caribbean. But we do still have some pretty strong trade winds west of the storm. What I think might be happening here is we might be getting some low-level divergence, which will make the environment surrounding, or at least on the western side of 90L, a little bit more dry. You typically want convergence in the low levels and divergence in the upper levels. If you have divergence in the low levels, that's fairly unfavorable for tropical cyclone formation. Though at the same time as that is happening, as I mentioned, we have this southeasterly fetch from the monsoon trough. So this could be a good fetch of moisture for the system and could allow it to sustain itself if it becomes a tropical cyclone, say like the GFS has tonight into tomorrow. Now, eventually the system does become a tropical cyclone on the model again. You can see south of Hispaniola. Now, there are some complications here. Exactly where does the system track? Does it form maybe a bit far west and then come north? And could it go over the highest terrain of Hispaniola? If it tracks like the GFS suggests, this could take it over lower terrain of Hispaniola and could allow it to survive north of the Caribbean islands. And we could see, something taking shape there. It's a bit unclear what would exactly happen there right now with current guidance. Or does it happen to be maybe a little bit further east? The GFS did yesterday have the storm a little bit further east and coming over Puerto Rico as it interacted with what is expected to be Tropical Depression 6 at the next advisory, or Invest 99L as I'm recording this. There's a lot of questions there. But given this environment here that the GFS depicts with its upper level trough here, you can see some upper level anticyclonic flow here developing aloft. So this is some favorable looks for the system and could allow it to become a tropical cyclone, again, if it has not sustained itself already by this time. And you can see on the model, eventually the system does come north of the Caribbean islands, and it sort of takes a very odd track, especially for August, but I guess that's just something you have to expect in an El Nino year. But after it comes north in this scenario, it would likely only be a threat to Bermuda. But of course, there's a whole lot of spread here on exactly where the system would go. We've seen model tracks that have had this system coming through the Leeward Islands, through Puerto Rico, through Eastern Hispaniola. We've even seen some models try and keep this in the Caribbean and maybe have it come west. There's a lot of uncertainty here, and we'll just have to keep an eye on this. But regardless of tropical cyclone development out of this, you can see that there's going to be a lot of adverse impact in the Caribbean from, say, eastern Cuba all the way to the Virgin Islands and on down to the Windward Islands in South America. So pretty significant impacts there, despite no tropical cyclone. That's something to keep in mind. But that's all that I've got for today. Lots going on in the tropics. I'll have future uploads. I'll try and have one out tomorrow, particularly on Hilary and also the Atlantic systems. I should be more available to make videos as I have not been this week, and I apologize for that. But thank you all for watching. That's it for now, and stay safe in the southwestern U.S. and Baja California.